Good evening, or what is a warm, bright and sunny day. It is Wednesday, the 12th of July. I've got a nice hot cup of tea. And a parcel to continue unboxing. So, what I'm going to pull out of here is this, which is Fabula Ultima TTJRPG, tabletop Japanese role-playing game. So, this is your world, this is your story. Make your choice and fight for what you believe in. Fabula Ultima is a tabletop role-playing game inspired by Japanese-style console RPGs, or JRPGs. In Fabula Ultima, you and your friends will tell epic stories of would-be heroes and fearsome villains set in a fantasy world brimming with magic, wondrous locations, and uniquely bizarre monsters. Create your own setting together with 3 different styles. As a reference, your group can freely shape the world they wish, including powerful kingdoms, small villages, major historical events, and the people who inhabit these lands. A simple and intuitive rule set that evokes both gameplay and atmospheres from the most beloved JRPGs, all while encouraging players to proactively set goals and influence the story. No choice is without consequence. A bestiary filled with monsters, demons, beasts, and more. From simple encounters to deadly bosses, our heroes will face many challenges. 15 classes to mix and match in order to create your favourite heroes. Inspired by video games, this modular growth system lets you design deep and unique characters, choose your group type, and embark on great adventures. Everything the Game Master needs to set the scene and accompany the group through marvellous, larger-than-life adventures, advice, guidelines, and all the tools required to bring the heroes' dark mirrors on stage, the villains. 364 colour pages, beautifully illustrated by professional artists from all over the world. This is essentially the role-playing game of inspired by Japanese console role-playing games, of course, like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and the like. And in some ways, this is very much a very different style of fantasy to what we're used to. We don't normally see this in Western-style fantasy, particularly. We take our cues necessarily from Tolkien and the Norse sagas and the Arthurian legend and the like. But people have been wondering what this is going to be like since the quick start, the free RPG release appeared. I think it was last year or 2020-21, and people going, well, this looks fantastic. I want to know more, because what they wanted to do was role play in the world of a Japanese role playing game, rather than necessarily play via their console. So we open up. There we go. It's actually got a dust cover. I'm going to remove the dust cover just to show you what's on the other side. On the other side, it's just simple black and white, and it's quite strange for a softback book to have a dust jacket like that. But nevertheless, see if I can put this back on correctly. Not managing it so far. Excuse me, because I'd just like to get it back. The other thing that comes in this is this, which is essentially your code. Sorry, I've got a bug bothering me. Your code for the PDF. I'm just going to slide that back in there. So let's have a look at the book. Start off with author's forward, introducing the game and the credits there. We have a list of origins and inspirations. So basically you'll recognise a lot of these. For example, Ryo Tiyama, the role-playing game, one of the few Japanese role-playing games to come across to the English-speaking market. Similarly, 13th Age and Apocalypse World and so on, as well as all the sort of like, so those are the sort of like, the role-playing game inspirations. So publishers forward, and then we get into the introduction, accompanied by this fantastic artwork, which gives a sense of a world far more than this. This is very much sort of like, looks like a kind of a cover you would get on the front of a JRPG kind of role-playing game when you buy it in the shop, you know, in its plastic box. But that looks much more enticing and actually interesting, I would have to say. Anyway, so you get to the introduction, explaining, you know, welcome you to Fabula Ultima, explains what a role-playing game is, and things like, you know, roles in the game, and the basics of play, and the rules, what the game's all about, and you can see sort of like some of the characters from a Japanese-style role-playing game, especially one sort of like evoking the kind of early 90s feel of, say, Final Fantasy VI. And then gives you the 8 pillars of the game world you'll create. You know, ancient ruins and harsh lands, a world in peril, clashing communities. Everything has a soul, magic and technology, heroes of many sizes. It's all about the heroes, mystery, discovery, and growth. All the point-of-the-thing elements you need to include in a Fabula Ultima game, if you can, and certainly in a campaign. And then essentially the descriptions of what the world could be like: high fantasy, techno fantasy, and especially if you look at something like, say, for example, Final Fantasy VII, that's classic techno fantasy. And then there's another one in here. Oh, natural fantasy as well. So, going forward, what you require in terms of game materials, including sort of like all the polyhedral dice, and the roles and essentially duties of the players. And this is looking at things like read this book, gather the proper tools, create the game world, choose an archetype for your group, create your hero character, cooperate with everyone else, contribute to the ongoing story, play as a hero. And so it's doing the same thing for the game master as well. Here we've got read this book, gather the proper tools, follow the rules, take part in world, group, and character creation as the game master, breathe life into the game world, breathe life into your villains, cooperate with everyone else, play to find out what happens, ask questions, build on the answers, look for inspiration. And all that could be sort of like, you know, just generally good advice for any role-playing game. Anyway, so now we get on to the game rules, and handling scenes and the conflicts and interactions within a scene. So, and then we talk about sessions and campaigns, before moving on to important rules. You know, allies always round down, add, subtract, multiply, divide, etc. You know, timing issues and so on. Next, breakdown of a character, anatomy of a character, what the character looks like. So it has traits like identity, theme, and origin, bonds, basically, which are tied to emotions, Fabula points. Basically, they can be earned by facing adversities and spent to invoke traits and bonds, character level, classes and skills, attributes, and so on. Clearly explained. And then the actual mechanics and the checks, what you're rolling, when you're rolling. So here you've got sort of like, here's the mechanics of sort of like how you roll, here's when you roll. So terminology of the skill checks continued. And how to perform an attribute check. Checks in play, success and failure, including an option there for optional success at a cost. And then, for example, so you can invoke a trait to reroll dice, or invoke a bond to improve the roll, but you can also invoke to fail. So accuracy checks, open, you know, basically different types of checks you can do in the game, all explained, including group checks, and then you've got a list of the frequently used checks and you know what they require. Another mechanic is the clock, and that is used in a variety of different ways. So it can be used to track an ongoing series of skill rolls, for example, on a task, or It can be a countdown mechanism for impending doom, and so on. Then we have discussion of bonds, conflict scenes, so you're determining participants, checking initiative, and also discussing goals. What's the point of this scene? What do you want to achieve out of it? And then we have discussion of the action economy, then dynamic turnover and so on, with an option here for enemy initiative. Sometimes they'll grab when to grab especially there's a guide to when to grab the initiative as the enemy. Space and distance for handling that in the game. Other actions. Handling things like spells, studies, skills, including dialogue in your tactics, because there's always a lot of interaction and talk with the bad guys you need to play when you're having a big fight. How to end a conflict can be important. And then we have sample goal clocks. So bring it down, catch the thief, convince the queen, keep them out, stop the ritual. That's all you sort of bring into play. Optional conflict rules are included as well. Essentially, so you can build on the core rules. Hit points and mind points. So what happens when you reach 0 hit points? And that's included for non-player characters, villains. So that the villains might, escape because hey, they're villains, and they've got to come back, surrendering. And the player characters, it might be sacrifice or surrendering. And there are rules there for resurrection as well, because that can feature in a story, depending upon the world. Benefits to resting, probably necessary between conflict scenes. Damage that can be suffered. Status effects also. And then Fabula points on how to use them. Gaining. So that includes altering the story, invoking a bond, invoking a trait, using a skill. And here we have a more detailed guide for each. Got to villains. So we have a guide to introducing villains in the plot, and the plot where player characters have Fabula points, villains have Ultima points. It's a nice touch. And you've got a guide there to what they can do with them, so they can use them to escape, to invoke a trait, or to recover. And villains can also escalate into greater versions of themselves. We have a power-up. How gear is handled, it's handled as abstract inventory points. Journeys and travels. Dangers that can be encountered. We still haven't got yet onto characters yet, how you create a character, but this is all the rules. So we've got a guide in there with, sort of like how to update the map as you go. With a rather attractive picture of a map there. And this also, of course, includes dungeons, because this is fantasy. Fantasy can have dungeons, or can have cave networks, or similar things. So you've got guidance there on how to explore dungeons and use danger clocks, involve magic. And you've got a list of spells and how to use them, how to cast a spell, including casting a spell furtively, so getting off just out of sight of the villain. This includes ritual, also for longer attempts. You've got rituals they might have to attempt or even stop. And economy and items, including potential rewards, items as rewards. We've little list of equipment. So martial items, armors, shields, weapons. And you've got a list of basic weapons. Basic arms and armor. And then projects for creating custom inventions. And then sample projects and inventions. And then group dynamics, and this is how to play. This is sort of like what you do when you're at the table. So, you know, it's a safe play environment, mutual trust and respect, game that's fiction do not replace human interaction, lines and veils, and similar guidance. And also handling player character against player character actions, secrets, leaving the group, absent players, issues that can come up during play. So then we move on to press start. And this is how you start the game. Session 0. Setting the boundaries of the game before you start. Again, going back to those safety tools, but applying them and discussing them when you start a game. So world creation, and the tables and so on, options for doing all of that. Group creation and ideas. So brought together by fate, guardians, heroes of the resistance, revolutionaries, seekers are classic groups, and they're all included here. And we get on to character creation itself. So that's actually, so let's just have a look. That's 154 pages. It's page 154. Before you 154 pages deep into the book, before you get into the process of creating what you're going to play. So creating your identity, we've got tables for doing that. Adding a theme. Origins, choose 2 to 3 starting classes, and your character begins at level 5, means you have 5 levels to distribute between any one of 15 available classes. So you automatically start out as a capable character. You start off with abilities that you might not normally have. So that's an interesting kind of setup. Oddly, we've got another big list of basic weapons, so on. And then we have finishing touches, including naming with a list of character names, character classes to choose from. So you have alchemist, black knight, gambler, gunslinger, healer, magic technician, monster mage, ninja, pirate, pugilist, ranger, red sorcerer, sage, samurai, soldier, spell fencer, summoner, thief, troubadour, and Valkyrie. But that's just the list, because over the page we have those classes expanded upon. So we start off with the Arcanist and her Arcana, and we have a Chimerist, Darkblade, Elementalist, Entropist, Fury, I'm just flipping through, Guardian, Lawmaster, Orator, I'll keep going, Rogue. These are great. I love the illustrations. They're fantastic illustrations throughout. Sharpshooter, Spiritist rather than Spiritualist, and these are all accompanied by their own. I mean, you know, if they have spells, they've got their own spells. So here are the Spiritist's spells. Tinkerer, which is going to be great for inventions, building inventions. So we've got a list of invention types to accompany that class. Wayfarer, Weapon Master. Then we have setting up some playthrough prologues and So, you know, we've got the questions to answer during this situation, and so the idea earlier, you know, things like, you know, how do they come together? Brought together by fate. You've got a table of options to roll on, and so on, and doing it the same for each of those suggestions, you know, of how the characters came together. Experience and levels. So, just a general guide to the processes involved there. Moving on to heroic skills. When a player masters a class by bringing it to level 10, that character may acquire 1 heroic skill. So, you know, heroic skills with class master requirement: adversity, dark blade, you know, basically makes you stronger, or mathemagic law master, extends single target spells. So there are little ways in which you become more powerful. So, and then we go on to the section for the Game Master. And there's a nice illustration, sort of the Game Master at work, deep in thought there, as she's about to write her notes. Game Master's role. What to do with her role, particularly before play, during session 0, during play, and between sessions. So, like, almost a bit bullet pointy, but I mean, it's to the point. How to handle the character classes. You know, one by one, discussing the benefits and advantages of each. The art of handling your villains. So, advice for that. Also dungeons. So things like, you know, preparing a dungeon, having a dungeon archive. So, you know, if your group particularly funded detailed dungeon exploration, and if your schedule allows for it, you might prepare your own dungeon archive. Straightforward. Whenever you have some time, jot down some few notes about potential dungeons and so on. You know, basically, whenever you need to improvise a dungeon, you can grab one from your archive. So essentially, sort of prepare one, and then we have a list of options to roll on, tables to roll on for things to create your dungeon. So, dungeon concept might be a petrified forest. The focal element is a forbidden spell or ritual. Population is bizarre plant monstrosities, and quirks a constant haunting melody. Rewards to hand out at the end of adventures and dungeons. And then designing rare items for your player characters to find and win. That includes rare weapons, because, you know, it's one of the things, you know, having a better sword is always sort of a great objective. Then we have sample rare weapons, and bows and brawling weapons and dagger weapons and firearms and flails. And heavy weapons and spear weapons, sword and rare swords and rare thrown weapons. And then we do essentially the same for shields and armour. And then we do the same for accessories. And I mean, the other thing, this does kind of match the kind of gameplay you will expect in a Japanese role-playing game, in a JRPG, because you will go around exploring, going down dungeons, finding treasure, and upgrading your equipment based upon what you have found. And also includes artifacts. So I'm just going to flip forward through these, there's plenty of them, and then how to design battles. So big engagements, and involving creatures and their ranks, to throwing in obstacles and gimmicks, but at the same time adding in information and hints that the player characters are going to pick up on, environmental effects, big boss battles, entirely different, you know, just a bigger scale. I'm doing the same for NPCs. And here we have various species in which you can use as the base templates. Spells for NPCs, and then we have some sample boss designs, so you can bring that into play fairly quickly. So with Angela, Fire Mage, as a sample, including her, you know, here's the stat. There's also, you've got quite actually a detailed villainess here. So you've got basically the background, the illustration, so I'm going through her design, and then at the end you've got the stats of both Angela and her fire lantern. And does exactly the same thing for the Thorn Shark. Again, a nice touch before we get onto the bestiary. With a guide to reading the characters, the monster profiles, and just beasts. And elementals, same thing. Humanoids the player characters might encounter, and monsters as well. Plants, because sometimes they can be a danger. The undead. And then we get to the index. So yeah, that is Fabula Ultima JRPG. It's published by Need Games. I think it's a really interesting role-playing game because it's doing something that most role-playing games don't do. You know, other role-playing games are kind of inspired by computer games, but this is really focusing on a particular style and genre of computer games. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this rather lengthy unboxing in the Nook. If you have, then please do click on the like button down below. And of course, if you've got any comments or feedback, I do appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to get more unboxings in the Nook, where you will see me out here with a box containing a book or game, which I will unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so, all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea, then please do hit the subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching another Unboxing Nook. Be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.